Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I am the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Mercedes Samudio, who is a licensed clinical social worker, a parent coach, speaker, best-selling author, and founder of the Diversity in Parenting Conference, which helps parents and children communicate with each other, manage emotional trauma, navigate social media and technology together, as well as develop healthy parent-child relationships. Mercedes started the End Parent Shaming movement, as well as coined the term Shameproof Parenting, using both to bring awareness to end parent shaming. I am really excited having Mercedes on the show to talk about parent shaming and how we can end parent shaming, as well as her great book, Shameproof Parenting. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, one who I am proud to call my friend, my colleague, and everything else. I love her so dearly. We have Mercedes today to talk to us about parent shaming and shame-proof parenting, and I'm so excited to have her here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited too.
So I have read your bio, but can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am Mercedes Samudio, as Maria said, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and parent coach in Southern California. And I primarily focus on helping parents to feel more confident in their parenting identity and raising healthy children. I also started a nonprofit a year ago where I also support professionals on being more aware of the diverse needs of diverse families and also helping them to feel more confident in working with parents and families, because oftentimes professionals sometimes get kind of sidetracked in how they're supporting families. So pretty much my whole professional self is all about supporting parents and families.
Perfect. And I noticed you mentioned something, parenting identity. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah. So when I talk to parents about who they are and what they need, I often get parents who say, I don't know how to do this parenting thing. And I say, do you know how to do this human thing? And they'll often laugh. And I'll say, let's talk about all the different spaces you've occupied in your life. And this is when we get into a parent who talks about who they are professionally, who they are academically, who they are in terms of their other social relationships, friend, partner, sibling, all these things. And as we begin to talk about all these different identities, we find this common theme with each parent where there's also a parenting identity that they have kind of cultivated from all of these other areas of their lives. And so essentially your parenting identity is who you show up as when you're in your parenting or caregiver role. And oftentimes the way you show up in that role is influenced by all these other spaces in your lives, your cultural identity, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, all these other spaces really inform how you come into your parenting sense of self or your parenting identity and how you ultimately choose to raise whole, healthy children.
Perfect. Now, are there any common types of parenting identity?
You know, what's funny? I kind of shy away from doing the types because I think we're all so different. I have met parents from all walks of life who, when you meet them and talk to them, you sometimes feel like, oh, I've got a good sense of who they are. But then they'll come out and say, you know, and I used to own a tiger farm. And I'm like, oh, okay, what? You know, like, all right. And so there's another piece of their identity that just shows up. And yes, I've been watching Tiger King, so ignore me when I talk about people who own tiger farms. But I just thought it was so interesting that there are so many spaces of ourselves that we forget inform so much of how we choose to raise children. For instance, many people in my age bracket who are kind of like in that millennial kind of age bracket, we grew up with family-friendly shows that always had a mom and a dad of some sort that helped their children learn life lessons by the end of that 30-minute episode. And a lot of us grew up thinking, I want to be like that parent. I want to have that family like that. Well, that really goes into how we choose to raise our kids. And sometimes it helps us because it gives us a good foundation on with which we want to raise healthy children. But sometimes it impedes us because we think if my kids don't act like Carlton Banks and Will Smith and all these things, then I'm not a good parent. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it gives us these really rigid boxes to stay within. And so a lot of the work that I do with parents is to help them find their own unique parenting voice and identity. So when they think, how am I going to address this concern with my child? They know where that's coming from and they understand where it's coming from.
I love that. Now, I know a lot of your work also involves parent shaming. Can you tell us what, in general, parent shaming is?
Parent shaming, in general, is anything that attacks a parent's sense of self, and it makes them feel ashamed or guilty for what they're doing in their family. Oftentimes, parent shame can take the form of unintentional advice, unsolicited advice. A lot of people like to use research to undermine parents. We like to use our own experience. Like when I had kids, we did this. And oftentimes parent shaming is done in a way that makes the parent second guess or feel guilty for what they've done in their parenting decisions.
You mentioned a lot of things that parents like myself who are parenting someone who is autistic have to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
That research component, I cannot, in unsolicited advice, I can't tell you how many DMs, emails I get with unsolicited advice, backed by research, backed by this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not helpful. And for parents who are parenting, children who are autistic, and, we already know parenting doesn't come with a manual, and then parenting somebody with a disability definitely doesn't come with a manual. So it's overwhelming in itself trying to navigate the role, and then having outside people trying to help navigate that role in an unhelpful way.
Yeah, definitely. And I often tell people who struggle with shaming parents, I always say, before you begin to talk to a parent about anything, ask yourself, am I willing to hear the history behind that parenting decision? If all you want to do is say, Maria, I wouldn't do that if I were you, but you don't want to sit down and listen to why she made that decision, then there's no reason for you to talk to that parent. If you don't have that capacity or that empathy to do that, just dropping random things at parents and then running away, it's not really helping the family. And oftentimes I have people that'll take the other side of it too, and they'll say, well, I want to help the children. And I say, well, are you going to take on all the responsibility of taking care of that child? Not just the unsolicited advice part, but are you going to take care of all the assignments they have to do with the child? Are you going to take care of all the appointments? Are you going to take care of all the food and shelter responsibilities? If not, we have to really think about, I can't sidestep a parent just because I'm so concerned with helping the child. That child has to live with that parent 24/7. And even in the instance of abuse, you still aren't able to help that kid always just by telling the parent how bad they're being. And so oftentimes I encourage, especially professionals, to really be mindful that many times a parenting decision that you end up seeing is just the surface of what that parent came to. You have no idea about all of the thoughts and the sleepless nights and the times that they've really weighed on what should I do next with my child. Oftentimes when we see a parent spank a kid or yell at a kid or, do something with the child, we think, oh, that parent's horrible. But many times, even in abusive situations, and I can't speak for every abusive situation, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I can say the majority of abusive situations, parents are under a lot of stress, and they themselves have never had the space to develop their own emotional regulation, let alone know how to help their child emotionally regulate. And so a lot of my work, especially with professionals and working with people who help families, is to kind of step back and say, does this human, not this parent, but this human, do they know how to take care of themselves? Do they have the tools and the coping skills to manage their own life circumstances? If the answer is no, I can guarantee you that all the parenting strategies you throw at them will go over their head because they don't even have the capacity to support themselves, let alone show up in their parenting identity in a way to support a child.
Yes. I mean, you dropped so many gems there. Look, I feel like it's over at this point. Like we can You dropped so many gems. And, I, as someone who is Black as you are,
Mm-hmm.
it is so different in our community. That parent shaming hits differently.
Yeah, it does.
It really
It
does.
really does.
And I think I didn't even realize that it was actually parent shaming, what I was experiencing, or what a lot of us have experienced, or what I've seen it being experienced in my family. I didn't even realize it was parent shaming because it's so natural. It's always occurring. Like, oh, you should do this for your child. Oh, you shouldn't do this for your child. So we know in the Black community, it is so different. And then to add in a child with disability, negating that, I know for a lot of us who are parents to children who are autistic, one of the things that we always have to deal with a lot of is the eating aspect. So my daughter, for instance, she doesn't care for meat. She doesn't care for vegetables. She loves fruit, a particular fruit. It has to be a certain brand. Particular kind of chicken nugget. That's the only type of meat she will eat. Certain types of chips. So, when we start talking about being this specific, and then we're talking Black family, of course, we get your child so spoiled. Oh, you just, if you give them what you've cooked and they have no choice to eat it, they're either going to starve or they're going to eat. My child will starve. Like she won't eat it, so having them try to understand that is so difficult.
Yes. And I think you hit on so many pieces of what it means to really understand cultural identity as it relates to your parenting identity. And that's something that's so important too, because a lot of times our culture teaches us the foundations of how you're supposed to raise a child. I grew up in a Black family where you are a child, honey. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't show up unless I tell you to show up. When I say jump before the P hits my lips, you should be in the air. So when you have that foundation of parenting, it's really hard to change that. A lot of African-American, I would say probably minority youth, grew up in families where corporal punishment was part of the disciplinary kind of structures and strategies. And so a lot of times we come into our parenting identity as an adult with that as the foundation for how to raise a child, for how to set limits for a child. And it takes so much to undo that for you as a person before you even decide to have a kid, to undo what's right, to undo what didn't work for your family. And for a lot of people, they don't have the luxury of doing that, or their family scoffs at mental and emotional healing so much that they never do it before they actually have a child. And so a lot of times when we come into raising children, especially from an ethnic cultural point of view, we're not just coming into it with all the research that certain groups of people have. We're coming to it from how our mom raised us, how our grandmother raised us, how our aunts and our uncles raised us. We're coming to it from a very communal space. And when you speak to your kind of space, Maria, about kind of being a parent of a atypically developing child, we didn't have a lot of instances for that growing up. We didn't understand. Every kid was either bad or good. It didn't matter if you had a diagnosis. Either you were a bad kid or you were a good kid. And for a lot of kids who are on the spectrum or dealing with other developmental issues, they're seen as bad. And that's kind of the rhetoric you get. Well, he bad. You need to just pop him. You need to just stop this. You need to just do that. And it's so important for people like yourself, myself, other people in minority backgrounds to really speak to the historical context of how parents in minority families really learn how to parent. And I think you and a lot of people in this space, we're in a new generation where we've really got to start seeing more parenting and family experts of color, because when you just see white or Caucasian people doing it, you start to see families saying, oh, that's white people stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with African-American families, Latinx population families, Asian American families, and so on and so forth, who say, oh, that positive parenting stuff, that's white people stuff. And the reason why they say that is because very few minorities are talking about it, or the ones who are, they don't have the Brene Brown status or the, Glennon Doyle Melton status. So we're not shown in these lights as much. And we have to really begin to talk about how important culture, as well as to the foundations of how people show up in their parenting identity. It's such a huge part of it. It's so important for us to discuss it. And I think when I see you, and I keep giving you so much props for it, when I see you talking about autism in the Black community, I'm like, go girl, go. Because we got to talk about it. We got to talk about autism in the Latinx population.
Mm-hmm.
We got to talk about, developmental disabilities and all these other spaces as well. And it's so important to not detach cultural identity from parenting identity, because it's such a huge foundation for how you show up as a parent.
It is. And even though I'm, autism and Black, and I'm speaking, it has been, difficult navigating it in my own family and in my own space. I had to set hard, firm boundaries with my family when Malia got her diagnosis, because they, as a lot of Black families are, they were like, no, we're not accepting that. We're going to pray about it. Like, yes, we're going to pray about it, but what you can pray for is pray for a good therapist.
Yes.
Pray I'm not on this list for too long for these services. But as far as praying her autism out, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Who she is. So, I had to set firm boundaries with my family and be like, look, this is how we raise Malia. This is how we, experience her diagnosis, and we're not ashamed of it. We're not going to ever shy away from it. And, if you can't accept that, then you can't see us. Now, I've been able to set those kind of boundaries with my family, but a lot of people in our community are not, because they rely on them for childcare, to help out with certain things, so trying to navigate how to set those boundaries, for yourself, and also not upsetting the people around you so much so that they just wash their hands of you. It's something that, has been a fine line with me working with clients. Have you experienced that as well?
I have. And I see that so much in communal identities and communal cultures where so much of the extended community is part of your support system. But I heard you say this word, and I have to continue to stress it: boundaries. Boundaries are so important to parenting, helping people to really get a good grasp of what your current situation is and how you and your partner and your caregiving support team are going to choose to work with it. And I think even when we're talking about family members who we're using for childcare and support, it's so important for us to talk to them about that. And oftentimes what I'll say is this: when you're sitting with your family, before you start talking about your parenting strategies and your child's diagnosis and things like that, sit with them and say, if my daughter had diabetes, would you refuse insulin to her? If my child had heart disease, would you make them go outside and play until they passed out? If my child was blind, would you pop them because they couldn't see? And everyone would say, no, of course not. If your daughter had, diabetes, I'd make sure she had her insulin exactly when you told me to have it. And so setting that space up for them, then you go into, well, my child has autism. Well, my child has ADHD. And this is an actual condition. Isn't it something we made up? It's not something that just happened to only our child and it's never been talked about before. This is real. And so just like you would give my daughter insulin, or you'd give them their inhaler if they were having an asthma attack, I'm asking that if you're going to help me watch them, please make sure that you follow X, Y, and Z protocols if you see this in them. Please make sure that you call X, Y, and Z if you see that. You can always pray with my child. You can always take them to whatever cultural or religious ceremony. But if they need help, please abide by the rules and the limits we have set in our home, the same way you would make sure you had an EpiPen if they were allergic, the same way you'd make sure they had an inhaler if they had asthma. Please respond to their autism, their ADHD, their X or their Y in that same way. And I think that really sets the foundation for you as a parent, not to feel like you're trying to pull, a teeth out of a rabbit tiger's mouth, but you're really trying to say, this is a real condition. I didn't make this up. This isn't because I'm a permissive parent and I refuse to set limits. This is because my child has a biological issue that's going on with them that requires certain types of boundaries, certain types of limits, certain types of personnel to come into the home, certain types of medication. And I really need you to respect that.
I love that. And we've talked about parent shaming coming from those we don't know, our family, but it can also come internally from ourselves. Can you speak to that?
I think that one happens the most. And to be honest with you, I think when I'm working with parents, I start there first. Those internal narratives that you have about yourself. I'm a horrible mom. I suck at being a dad. I'll never be able to do this. What if I mess up my kids for life? Those things come from what we believe or what expectations others and ourselves have set for being a parent. I tell parents at the beginning of everything, your kids will be human. They will mess up. They will have problems. Something you do to them when they're 5, they will talk to their therapist about when they're 25. It's inevitable. There's nothing we can do about it. But what we can do is remember every time we interact with this person, we're interacting with another human, and it's an opportunity for us to develop a healthy relationship with them and ourselves. If you're so worried about how perfect you're being, you're going to miss all those opportunities to connect with another human being. And so if you start there saying, this is a human, this isn't a child, this isn't a baby, this isn't my boo-boo, this isn't my little kiddo, this is a human. Every time you interact with them is an opportunity to work on that relationship for better or for worse. And I think it helps to change that internal dialogue, because oftentimes parents feel like they have this weight on their shoulders. I've got to make this person perfect. There's no way to make a person perfect. You're not perfect. Your parents didn't make you perfect, and there's no way as humans for us to make another human perfect. But what we can do is we can remember that in this relationship, the imperfect person has safety, has love, and has empathy. And if we can remember that in that relationship, then we can allow some of those imperfections to kind of show up as a way to teach us, how do we do this as a human? I can tell you right now that every way of being a human has been tested over these past 3 weeks, honey. If you asked me to teach somebody how to be human, I'd say, honey, don't look at me right now. I don't know how to do it. Like, I'm failing at this human thing right now, right? And so for people who are living with their child during this shelter in place kind of space that we're in, you're really being tested as a human yourself. Yeah. How are you connecting with yourself after all of this overwhelming stress and overwhelming uncertainty? You're not perfect, but neither is your kid, right? And so I would say after all of this, the biggest idea is this. If you find yourself with that internal shaming dialogue, take some time to say, is this true? Is there evidence that I am failing as a parent? Is there evidence that I'm succeeding as a parent? Are there opportunities for me to repair a rupture that may have happened within the last few weeks? Is there an opportunity for me to connect with a part of myself that's good and beautiful and healthy? Is there someone I can talk to, whether it be a colleague, a friend, a professional, who I can kind of dump some of this stuff on and they can help me suss through it? Really taking that time to reflect on what can I do with this narrative helps us to really start to rewrite that narrative. It won't happen overnight because many of us got these narratives when we were younger and it's kind of stuck with us. But really being proactive about changing those narratives, not feeling like I have to hold on to them as a way to light a fire under my behind to do right as a parent, but saying, this is a narrative that doesn't seem to be serving me. Every time I get into this downward spiral of how horrible of a parent I am, I tend to be more detached from myself and my child. So it's not serving me anymore. So what can I do with it instead? And I think that reflective piece will just help you be more aware of how much of these narratives are interfering with your own ability to show up for yourself.
Yes. And I think that is so true, especially when I'm working with parents whose children just got the diagnosis, going through so much because of that internal shame and the internal pressures they put on themselves. And now they're like, oh, my kid was supposed to do this, this, and this. You know, they've already got there in their mind, their kid could be 3 years old, but they are already looking down to when their kid is 30 and they're supposed to be, you know, doing A, B, and C because that's
exactly
in their mind. And now they're like, oh my God, A, B, and C might not be possible. So now they're struggling to accept the diagnosis and accept that they have to now parent differently, you know, so that's where I start as well, is that, you know, if you as a parent are not on board or are not getting it together, then the child, there's no reason even trying us to work on this parenting thing, because you have to work on these hurdles first, because if you're not going to be able to be 100% into, okay, let me get myself together and make sure I'm here, then all the work that we do for you in your parenting style and what you do in the environment as a parent, it's not going to work.
Yeah. And you bring up something that I think is commonly ignored in parenting, and that's grief. And that's grief when you have this whole ideology or whole idea of how your family's going to look. I'm going to have a partner. We're going to have a house. We're going to do da 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 da. My kids are going to be X, Y, and Z. And we're going to put them in this school and this. And I have yet to meet a person who has entered into parenthood without some semblance of that narrative. What do you want your home and your family to look like? And unfortunately, many people don't get to have that dream space of, I wanted to have a partner. I wanted to have a home. I wanted to have this job. I wanted my kids to go to this school district. And so a lot of times when children come into the world, parents for the first couple years, especially, are experiencing a lot of grief for what they wish could have happened in their parenting, grief for what they wish could have been in their environment for their child. And I think you brought up something that's really important, is grief for the child I wanted to have. If your child ends up having some type of developmental diagnosis, that's scary, because no one says, I can't wait to have a child with autism. I can't wait to have a child who is developmentally delayed. Like, no one has that in their dream space for the child that they bring into the world. And so we really have to talk about this grief as well. And when you have an idea of what type of child you're going to have, and then a child comes into the world and is not quite in that space, you do have to do some grieving of, I did not envision my parenting looking like this, but this is who God has given me, or this is who source and spirit has given me. And so how do I connect with this person that's here? And how do I grieve for the person that I wanted to be here? And I think oftentimes that can be just as powerful as all the other things we can do with parents, is really help them grieve for the idea of the family or the child they thought they were going to have.
Yes, that is what we're our work is. It's difficult to try to, to get into that space of being truthful with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it starts, because there's that shame. You really feel this way. Oh my gosh, you are a horrible parent.
Yeah.
If you feel that way, and I just let people know, look, my kids frustrate me. They do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a perfect person and they frustrate me. I have 3 kids.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you right now, during this shelter in place, that frustration is testing the patience of this therapist. But it's that kind of honesty that gets the shame. They're like, oh my God, you're a therapist. You of all people should be able to control yourself. And it's like, okay, no.
Yeah.
So it's the honesty piece that really gets us, those hiccups, because we can't be honest about how we feel, and we cannot then deal with that honesty.
Yeah. And you can't shame-proof yourself if you're dishonest about how you're truly feeling. For instance, I work with parents who have gone on the infertility journey and finally had a kid. And then, of course, as we all know, when you have a kid, no matter how badly you wanted it, kids are overwhelming oftentimes. And so I've definitely sat with families who have been in various states of infertility, and they feel guilty for saying, this is harder than I thought, because they've struggled for so long to have a child that when they finally have one, they just want to kind of have these rose-colored glasses of, well, we wanted it, so it's here. But I often tell them it's also really difficult to raise another human being, especially for the first 20 years when they need you practically 24/7. Like, that's really difficult to do. And so don't allow your fight during the infertility battle to deter you from being honest and authentic about when you're in a relationship with another human, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much you die for them, no matter how much you give them, to still have a space where I can't stand this person right now and I really need to go take a nap or go do something else. Mm-hmm. Like, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think when we talk to those truths, it allows people to, number one, uncover shame and kind of keep shame from hiding, from you. But it also allows you to start to shame-proof yourself as a parent and shame-proof your parenting and your family, because now you can say, we are human. We fight, we fuss, we hug, we hang out, we do X, we do Y, but we're all human on this human journey together, and we're choosing to keep choosing each other in our relationship. And that's essentially what shame-proof means. It doesn't mean we never fight. It doesn't mean I'm always on it as a parent. I'm always ready and patient and empathetic to my child. It means that even in those moments when we're not, we understand that it's more about our humanness and not because each person in in the family is so deficit or bad. It's because we're all human and we all have different needs. And sometimes we don't ask for those needs to be met in healthy ways. And so I think when we can remember that and we can be honest about how in the exact same space we can love and be annoyed with the same person, it changes the way shame influences us. It changes the way that we interact with ourselves and our children, because we say, you're human, I'm human. And on this human journey together, we're going to mess up. As long as we're committed to reconnecting with each other, we should be fine.
Mm. And you've mentioned, the term shameproof a few times, and I know that it's a term you have coined, and she has an amazing book on this, Shameproof Parenting, and I have it in every format that it is available, audio, actual book form, and ebook.
I love it. Thank you.
Because it is an amazing book. Can you tell us about Shameproof Parenting and your book?
Yeah, so the book Shameproof Parenting, as Maria said, is a book that really looks at the ways shame kind of infiltrates and influences your parenting identity. And we really dive into what is shame, how do we develop these shame narratives, and what can we do once we're in this parenting space to really identify how it's affecting the way we're connecting to ourselves and to our children. And in the book, we talk about six really important tenets to help you understand what it means to shame-proof your family. And for me, shame-proofing doesn't mean we're shame-free, because unfortunately, as long as we're around other humans, shame is kind of there, judgment and kind of looking down at people is kind of there. But we learn in the Shameproof Parenting book that it's really about understanding how our family manages shame. How do we understand it? How does it look when it kind of comes into our family? And how do we as a family connect with each other to manage it? I'll reiterate what I said again. When you're a parent and you see how human you are and you're able to connect with that humanness of your child or your children, it changes the way shame works, because you're no longer being mad at your child for their behavior, but you're noticing this kid has some need that needs to be met and they don't know how to get it met. So they're yelling, they're screaming, they're falling in the floor, they're slamming doors because they don't know how to communicate their needs. And I always ask parents, when's the last time you had a hard time communicating your needs with a coworker, with a boss, with a partner? And oftentimes parents can really connect with that empathy, because it's difficult to ask for what you need sometimes. And so our kids struggle with the same things. And so in a shame-proof family, it doesn't mean that we're devoid of any conflict. It just means that when that conflict comes up, we don't start to eat away at each other. We start to look at each other and say, hey, it looks like you need something, but you're not doing it in the healthiest way. This is the best way to get that need met if you want me to help you with it. And that's the same for parents, to also remind yourself that if you want something from your kids, yelling, hollering isn't always the way, but to think, I need the house to be clean. So how do I get that need met with the help of everybody in the house? And I think it becomes part of this idea of we're all human trying to do the best we can. And so when we're shame-proofing ourselves, it's that idea. We're all human on a human journey together. How can we support each other?
And guys, I really cannot recommend this book enough. We will have the link in the show notes for you to go and get your copy, because I'm telling you, it's a game changer.
Thank you.
Now, as we get to wrap up, do you have any resources or tips for parents?
Yeah, I really oftentimes, along with my book, also encourage people to read anything by Dan Siegel. I really love his library of books, because he doesn't just talk about parenting strategies, but he also looks into the neuroscience and developmental spaces of where children are oftentimes. And I think that information helps parents mitigate and manage their expectations of themselves and their children. I also like some of Dr. Shefali's work on conscious parenting, because again, I think it kind of hits on what I share, which is, once you understand yourself, you'll have more empathy to understand your kid. And then also, I highly recommend Maria's work. I think the work that you talk about in terms of cultural significance in working with autism and developmental issues really helps parents to just really understand that even though we're Black or Latinx or Asian American, this still affects us as well. And it's not because our kids are bad. It's because they literally have a developmental issue that needs to be addressed, not with corporal punishment or limit setting, but with actual techniques and professional support. So I love your work as well. And I always recommend your work. I love your IEP stuff. I'm like, oh yes, every parent who's like, I need an IEP. I'm like, here's this woman's name. Please go talk to her. Please get her stuff, because it's so much needed, especially in our minority communities, how to navigate those systems when our children have developmental issues.
Thank you so much. Now, where can the folks listening find you? If they want to shame-proof their family and get more information, where can they go to connect with you?
You can start at my website, shameproofparenting.com. There you'll see my blog. You'll also see the store with all of the things like the book and just different resources for you. You'll also find links to my social media. And if at all you want to connect with me on social media, if you look up Mercedes Samudio, Shameproof Parenting, and or Diversity in Parenting, you should find me. And I love connecting with people via social media. I just got a TikTok thanks to this whole shelter in place space. So I'm everywhere. Just look me up, and I love connecting with people and supporting them.
Thank you. And I'll have all of that information in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show and dropping all of these gems.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG Stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBPod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.